Thomas, Jenna, and Ben were playing soccer in the park, their laughter ringing in the air. Ben kicked the ball with a loud thud. It flew through the air straight to Jenna. She expertly controlled it with her feet and ran with it, dodging Thomas's attempt to steal it from her. "Come on, Thomas!" she shouted, her eyes twinkling. Thomas smiled and ran after her, determined to get the ball. But it was too late. Jenna had already passed it to Ben, who was waiting at the goalpost. "Here it is!" Ben shouted as he kicked the ball towards the goal. Thomas clapped as the ball went in. Jenna and Ben hugged each other, beaming with happiness. They cheered as they celebrated their victory. "For the fact that you were only 2 against me, you did well." Thomas laughed when something caught his eye. As usual, the children had brought their magic singing bowl with which they could travel through time. Its surface lit up and a golden engraving of Mount Uluru appeared. A new mission," Jenna said excitedly. "Australia!" The 3 friends hopped on their bikes and pedaled off towards their uncle's museum, the Time Treasury. As they approached, they heard a loud squawk and saw the dodo Kiki perched on the windowsill next to their uncle. They all laughed with delight at the sight of Kiki. Their Uncle Matthew welcomed them warmly. "A new adventure?" he asked. The children brought out the singing bowl, but as they showed it to him, the image had changed from the Uluru to the Empire State Building in New York City. "Well, maybe you guys got it wrong," Matthew said with a grin. "We didn't," Jenna replied flippantly. Matthew shrugged his shoulders. "Whatever. The display case on New York is on the 2nd floor." Still confused, the children ran off, with Kiki chasing after them. But Ben stayed behind for a moment, still looking into the singing bowl. Suddenly he cried out, "The image has changed again!" Jenna and Thomas turned around just in time to see Ben disappear into a diorama with a surprised yelp. Matthew ran up behind them just then, eyes wide with shock, as he had seen it too. He muttered something about Ben not having flicked against the singing bowl like he normally did before they traveled through time. So what had happened? The 4 of them looked at the display case Ben was sucked into and read the plaque underneath. Old Malaga in beautiful Andalusia in southern Spain. Jenna sighed heavily as she realized what this meant. Ben was traveling through time without them. Ben found himself in a dark, unfamiliar place with no idea what had happened. He was standing on a cold stone floor. A few steps further ahead, light shone through cracks in the wall. He felt along the wall until he found a door and slowly opened it. The shed opened to an alleyway. As he stepped into the alley, he saw a picturesque Andalusian square in front of him bathed in brilliant sunlight. Suddenly, he heard an argument coming from the corner house on the left side of the square. A young boy ran out crying but stopped short when he saw Ben, obviously confused. "What's your name?" Ben asked gently. "Pablo," the boy replied softly. "Pablo Picasso." Ben looked at Pablo in shock. Pablo Picasso was one of his heroes. Back at the museum, Jenna, Thomas, Kiki, and Matthew were standing in front of the Malaga display case, confused and worried about Ben. Matthew scolded himself for letting the children use the singing bowl. It was far too dangerous. Jenna tried to keep a cool head, reading the sign more closely. It explained that they were looking at Malaga at the end of the 19th century, and that the great painter Pablo Picasso had been born there. She just hoped that Ben would come back with the singing bowl. Thomas was eager to do something. "We could make a new singing bowl out of the materials you have here in your workshop," he said to Matthew. Their uncle agreed, so Thomas and Jenna stayed behind while Matthew went off to find what he needed. In Malaga, Pablo told Ben about his dream of becoming a professional artist, but his father wouldn't let him. "If you like, I can show you some of my pictures," Pablo said. Ben nodded happily. The 2 children walked into the beautiful house with yellow facade, green shutters, and narrow balconies, and looked at Pablo's abstract paintings. While showing his paintings, Pablo asked Ben why he had such strange clothes. Suddenly, Ben realized with surprise that his clothes hadn't changed as usual when traveling through time. "You won't believe this, but I'm a time traveler," Ben explained. Pablo laughed. "Come on, you're kidding," Pablo said. Yes, I am. Here, I travel with the help of a bowl. Ben wanted to bring out his singing bowl, but it wasn't there. Where had it gone? Jenna, Thomas, and Kiki were startled and jumped back in surprise when the singing bowl was spat out of the display case in the museum. Matthew came back at the same moment with an old rusty bowl and was completely perplexed. They looked at each other together and said at the same time, "Oh no!" Thomas said, "Without the bowl, Ben can't return. We must save him, and I have an idea. What if I engrave Malaga into the singing bowl? Maybe that will open the vortex for us." "Oh, Thomas, I'm not sure. What if it destroys the magic?" Jenna replied. Thomas insisted, "I know it's risky, but Ben is our cousin. We can't just sit here and do nothing." Matthew handed him a stylus to engrave something into the singing bowl, but Thomas failed. The magic blocked any sign he put on it. Thomas angrily threw away the stylus. They had to find a way to get Ben back as soon as possible. Meanwhile, Ben was worried because he couldn't travel back without his singing bowl, so Pablo promised to help him. Likewise, Ben wanted to help him. "My father is a painter himself, but he doesn't like my abstract style," sighed Pablo. So they went together to Pablo's father, but he neither wanted to hear about his son's art, nor help a stranger with odd clothes like Ben's. Ben was disappointed, as he knew that Pablo's art would enchant humans in the future. It was unfair that his father didn't believe it. "If my son's pictures are supposed to have a magical effect on people, I want to see it," grumbled Pablo's father. That's when Pablo had an idea. He remembered that he had once painted a cubist singing bowl. Maybe that was exactly what Ben needed. Pablo fetched it from upstairs. He smiled shyly. "This is one of my best paintings," he said quietly, showing Ben the beautiful cubist singing bowl he had created. And even though Ben was skeptical, he wanted to give it a try and flick against it. In the meantime, the children in the museum were almost in despair when they saw Malaga appear again in the singing bowl. Thomas looked at Jenna determinedly, and she knew what he was thinking. Matthew was trying to warn them, but without hesitating, Jenna and Thomas both reached out to the bowl. So at the same moment as Ben was carefully flicking against Pablo's picture of a singing bowl in Malaga, Thomas and Jenna were flicking against the real singing bowl in Matthew's museum. Swirling vortexes of light surrounded them and pulled them away. Moments later, Ben was standing joyfully in front of Matthew and Kiki in the museum with Pablo's painting in his hand. But now Jenna and Thomas were in Malaga. They stood next to Pablo and his father, who had fallen off his chair in shock when he saw them appear out of thin air. Jenna and Thomas asked if they had seen a dark-skinned boy named Ben. Yeah, he just left us with one of my paintings," Pablo explained. Jenna realized with relief that Ben had found a way back. Pablo's father mumbled something to himself about Pablo's great talent, completely befuddled by what had just happened. Pablo looked proud and beamed with joy as he heard that. Jenna smiled warmly at him and thanked him for helping Ben travel back home safely, while Thomas gave him an appreciative nod and patted him on the back encouragingly. With that, Jenna and Thomas flicked against the singing bowl and were pulled into another vortex, which transported them back safely to Matthew's museum. There, Ben was standing with the painting in his hand. "Ben!" Jenna cried out as she ran over to hug him tightly. Thomas followed close behind, relieved that his cousin was safe. "What happened?" he asked. Ben shook his head, still trying to comprehend what had just happened. "I was in Malaga with Pablo Picasso," he said excitedly. "He painted this cubist singing bowl, and I flicked it. And then here I am." They were relieved that everyone was safe now after this crazy adventure. But one question remained unanswered. What was wrong with the singing bowl?